Marina, you got the first topic, but I want to, Melinda, do you know if anybody else from your team will be joining?
We don't need to wait. Niaz won't be joining, Pritesh may join.
I think this first one should be pretty quick. It's just kind of clarifying some of the discussion that's been happening on GitHub. I think it might have been a little bit resolved last night, but I know that there was a lot of kind of talking. I think just a little bit of confusion in GitHub, and so sometimes I think that can be resolved in person or whatever this is. I'll post a link to the issue here. So I think there's two kind of big things that we can kind of talk about. One of them I think we briefly talked about last week, but I just want to kind of mention again. And I think that this was discussed in the issue as well. I think there was some concern about the storing multiple signatures in the in one DISI because of the concerns about the
in a single
certificate
envelope
chain. Yeah, exactly. In the signing envelope. Yeah, because the concerns about the where to put the certificate chain in that case. And I think one of the easiest thing in that particular one, I think is going to be an easier one to solve, in that we could just have multiple different signing envelopes for the same data, each one with a single signature, which achieves multiple signatures without that one piece of confusion. I think that the other ones I think might be a little bit trickier, so we can have more discussion here about the.
Yeah, I have an agenda item with basically things to kind of cover from last week's discussion. I went through the recording. There were some open items or things that I wanted to provide feedback on. We did last week end up talking about multiple signatures in an envelope and how they would be handled. I don't think, as per the requirements that we have defined, we would need multiple signature envelopes or envelope having multiple signature inside the same blob. So basically with Notary V2, this is my understanding, when you do a sign operation, the end result is you have a signature manifest and corresponding signature blob being stored in the registry. Now that is a result of a single sign operation. If you are signing multiple times, it would just end up being multiple manifests and corresponding blobs being stored. And then you use the references API to say, given this image digest, give me all the things that refer to it and get a list of signatures. There's another option where if somebody does really want to associate multiple signatures in a single sign operation, you can have them as multiple blobs associated with the same signature manifest. But I think inside of a blob and inside of a signature envelope, we don't have a requirement to have multiple signatures.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there are like some small cases where it would be easy for multiple people to sign the same thing before uploading it, like if they're all at the same company or something. But I think in most cases, because of the immutable nature of registries, it would definitely be easier just to upload one thing for each signature and not have to change it.
I think we should
indeed. We're not conflicting with what Melinda said, actually. So if you do want to do multiple signatures, you can still do it in one upload operation, and I'm air quoting upload operation, right? So you upload the two signatures as separate blobs, and then a single manifest could say, these two blobs represent two signatures, and push it against the single artifact, the thing it's signing.
So I think I'm thinking the same thing. I was just the same general thing. It's just that you could either do that at the same time, or you could do that at different times. But I think to simplify for Notary, having them each be one is easier. I think DISI expands to allowing multiple signatures in an envelope, and I think that's probably not for this particular use case. I don't think that's something we'll want to take advantage of, at least not initially.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to read the thread last night, but what I'm hearing is they're supportive, like having the DISI format have a collection of which Notary happens to only use a collection of one item each time, means that the other scenarios can use it for multiples and we can still align with it. So that doesn't seem like a conflict. That sounds good, like goodness.
Yeah, I think this one we're on the same page about. So like that sounds great. I think
I
that
think
the
just the follow up on that is, if we all agree on this, we should have this. We should specify this in the requirement that an envelope will contain one and only one signature. And
oh, yeah, like
additionally, we
one or a
can,
collection of one. That makes sense. Yes. So just so that we make that clear. I agree.
Melinda, are you saying in Dizzy or in Notary?
in Notary, the signature format requirements, we should specify that.
That's right. So, because that allows Dizzy to be a generic format for other things where we specify in Notary, this is how it's used.
Yeah.
Until we have another scenario, like I don't want to overly constrain it, but just for what we know now, to balance the multiple signature scenarios and the immutability, this is how we've been working in that constraint.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a scenario that says this doesn't work yet.
Yeah, and it doesn't prevent the scenarios that we see for multiple signatures. We can still achieve that.
Okay, and then the other one, which I think is probably the harder thing to talk about, is where to store the certificate chain. This is, I think, where we were kind of going. I think this is what was getting, I think, more confused in the thread. So I wanted to make sure to bring it up here. I think that if there's just one signature per envelope, there's definitely a possibility of putting the certificate chain in the payload as like it's kind of as a header, but it's within the payload, if that makes sense. Because like the payload would just have multiple things within it, including the certificate chain. I think what might make more sense, and people can, we can talk about this, is to actually just store it as a separate block in the registry so that you could verify the chain before then verifying the signature on the thing that the chain gives you the key for. But we can talk that. I think that, yeah, so that's just what I wanted to kind of discuss and see if we could find a way within Notary to store that kind of chain information separately.
Sure.
Whether that's something we're interested in.
Yeah, I had some views on that. I'll let anybody else go first if they wanted to highlight something.
Feel free to go first.
All right. So regarding the blobs, so having a signature envelope and different things that relate to the same signature, like the certificate chain that will be used, that needs to be packaged together during generation of signature, and that all of that information needs to be available when you verify signatures. I think from a implementation of a signing service or a signing component, it makes it much simpler to have the signing component produce envelope, and the envelope is fully qualified or self-contained in terms of all the information that is required for verification. The moment you split it into multiple blobs, and I think last week we talked this about TSA too, having the TSA signature as a separate blob or certificate chain as a separate blob, it is going to make the signer's job difficult. We could do it that way. I think the storage, the signing interface, the verification all become complicated because they know how to deal with different pieces of information, especially for the signing component, the interface for that, you have to now interact multiple times with that component because probably that is the component that knows the signature, the certificate chain that goes along with that envelope. So I'm basically my view is having the envelope self-contained with all of the information is going to make implementation, etc., simpler. I don't see a strong reason to separate it out into blobs.
But
So let me-
there's a sorry.
Go ahead, Justin.
Okay. If there's an OCI object that contains the envelope and the chain and the timestamp, for example, although the timestamp might be in the envelope because that's been done separately, but anything else you need, then that does seem to me to be a self-contained thing, and we would have that would be the signature plus metadata as a single object, and that would seem to me to be self-contained enough. It's one thing you push and that has everything that the client needs to decode.
Yeah.
So
I was
sorry,
going to go
Justin.
right there. I was going to probably go to that same point. When you look at like the index and some of the manifest types now, it is a collection of blobs. And then we've also got another thing coming down being discussed on the OCI side, which is to be able to embed the data directly into that manifest. And so your grouping of all these blobs could be the blob content in addition to the grouping object. And so it'll be one pool.
So I think that my biggest concern here is that if you're grouping with the root and all the intermediaries with like I'll call it the leaf signature, the actual signature on the data, if any step of that process is revoked or needs to be updated, the whole thing then has to be changed, which seems a little bit problematic. So like if an intermediary ever wants to rotate their key or whatever, you then have to replace every single artifact down the tree from it, instead of having that all be separated out into different, like distinct layers that could then be replaced.
I think they have
to.
to no matter what. I don't know if we've got an option with the way the registry does the Merkle tree, the directed graph, to be able to swap out a child without changing the parent.
I mean, unless they're stored as separate blobs, right? They're just separate blobs of the registry.
Even if they're separate blobs, if you change a blob, you have to change the manifest. There's no way to have a manifest refer to an arbitrary blob. It's always referring to that specific digest.
Okay.
Or an update. I mean, I guess you can do something interesting with tags, but that kind of it creates the problem I think we're trying to solve. One more piece just to this, because I'm not sure if this helps or doesn't. A blob can be multiple files, right? So that's one of the things that makes registry so helpful in many of these cases. Is a blob is just a blob. It could be one or n files in that single blob, which is used to be, which is referred to a layer in a container image, but it's just a collection of one or more files. If you want to make separate blobs because you need independence of those for whatever reason, because you're trying to do concurrent downloads, which is what happens with large files. These aren't large files. Then we have that option as well. So I just want to, I'm not sure exactly which piece that we think is problematic here, but these are just some of the tools that are available to us.
So
I think that's an interesting idea. Oh, sorry, I'll let you go, Belinda. Of just like having multiple things, but in the same blob, but different objects.
I wanted to respond to Justin and Brandon. It works when you push, like Docker CLI and the whole protocol and Merkle tree is geared towards decomposing and being able to track it using single hash, etc. The signing happens at a layer much lower than the Docker push. By the time you're doing Docker push, it doesn't really matter how decomposed it is. It can all be associated with a single signature manifest, etc. The issue isn't at that layer. The layer is, at least the layering in my mind is there is Docker interacting with Notary CLI, and Notary CLI is interacting with a bunch of plugins which do the actual signing. So if you have a HSM-based or a cloud-based service which is doing the signing, the whole sign operation is offloaded. So from the CLI, you just indicate that something like Docker Notary v2 sign image digest key ID or a friendly key name. You may not have the certificate chain on the client. All of this can be configured remotely, and then you make a call to this service. So if you break it down into blobs, in different blobs, the payload and the certificate chain, this service then has to either give you two operations and you interact twice, or it has to form a response which has two distinct elements. One is the payload blob and one is the certificate chain, maybe the TSA signature. We're talking about 2 or 3 pieces. So I don't see the benefit of doing it as separate blobs as versus packaging all of this in a single payload. Does that make sense?
I'm going to pull up a PR in a minute here and get you for the data object, because I think that would probably answer your question.
Well, that's the data object is one solution. Everything could be inlined in the as annotations in the document as well. I mean, we could, if,
I think the point I'm trying to drive is at the bottom of this chain where signing happens, components calling components, there's a single thing that is going to produce the whole signature, including the TSA, including the certificate chain. And if you want to keep that interface simple, it has to be in a single envelope or a single response. I think as long as we can achieve that's what I'm trying to aim for.
Yeah, this is
I'm trying to understand what it is that we're trying to solve, because I keep on hearing us getting caught up in and how many round trips a client makes to a server and the relative trade-offs to that. Like, which problem are we trying to solve? I think if there's a security concern because of the round trips of some sort, that's great to understand. But I'm not hearing that. I'm hearing this, focus on a simplicity of an API, which has other trade-offs.
Yeah, it could be there may be a security angle to it because you're interacting with this component multiple times, being able to correspond that you gave me an envelope and now give me the certificate chain and the TSA corresponding to it. Usually, like the TSA signature will be generated if you have a component signing something and that's generating the TSA signature at the same point. What you're doing now is asking the service to either store that correspondence separately, or you get the signed envelope and then generate the hash of it, pass it back to the service and say, hey, give me the TSA for this. You might as well directly interact with the TSA rather than calling the service for it.
Isn't that like if I ask the registry for, hey, give me the signatures for, NetMonitor V1, and it returns a collection of a descriptor of manifests. So I'm trying to be a little more finite, and you can filter down to the ones you want. So there's 4 that come back, let's say, but I only care about one particular signature for Wabbit Networks or Acme Rocket's production environment. If I have to, right now, the standing proposal is I might need to make one more request, but I know which signature it is, and now I have to actually get the signature to validate it. It's another API call, but it is a distinct one that doesn't have the other 3 signatures that came down to it already.
No, that's that's from a verification standpoint. I don't think this is much less of an issue from verification standpoint. The verification component can make multiple pull requests, multiple pulls for separate blobs, etc. if they are all related together through a single signature manifest. I'm talking about when the signing occurs and you're generating a TSA for that signature envelope. It happens as part of the same step. If you configure a signing service saying, please generate TSA signature in addition to the signature envelope, it's going to do it in one step. And it wants to return that as a single combined thing that is the envelope.
So isn't the envelope and the signature a file, like whether it's in the manifest or another file? I'm trying to figure, does it really matter? As long as that stuff, because we talked about offline ephemeral clients, like sealed in a vault kind of thing. Well, it has to reach the TSA. So assuming it can reach the TSA, it gets that piece of that content back. It creates the signature. So now you have the envelope and the payload.
Yep.
My understanding is you can still do that. That's one file. Maybe it's a collection of files of 2, but if it's one file, then you have your content.
So basically my proposal is it's a single envelope, or the enclosing file, whatever we say, contains the payload. I think we are pretty much aligned on what needs to go in the payload. The open items are where the TSA signature and where the certificate chain goes. The TSA, at least in Dizzy, there's an open issue considering if the TSA can be added as a top level envelope attribute. I'm guessing after we define what formats are supported, etc., and how it is verified, that probably will go through. I'm asking for the same thing for the certificate chain. The certificate chain should be in the envelope. It makes the signature self-contained. It makes it simpler for the signing component to produce a fully verified or verifiable signature in one go, instead of producing bits of information, those which are stored separately as blobs.
Yeah, I understand this, Milan. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maria.
I was just going to say, I think it definitely makes the signing part easier, but I do worry about the discovery of the signatures. Because if you just have a root key, like you start with this one root key, and then you download, manifest that lists a bunch of signatures for a particular artifact, how do you even know which signatures to download unless you know which intermediaries and then which keys you're using to verify? Because I think that without that certificate chain from the root that you trust, you don't know which key to use for a particular artifact. And so I feel like having that be a separate thing could help with the key verification and discovery piece.
I
So
think
there is a
that
hint piece of, so just to try, because this is one of the other pieces of the conversation there. If you look at the way the refers API works, right now it returns a complete manifest. We're debating on whether that returns a new type of manifest descriptor that has the 3 elements today, which still don't tell you which one it is, plus the artifact type and the annotation. So I can throw a hack doc that Michael Brown's been working on, but the point is not as important. The point is do I have enough hint information to tell me which I can pull down? So the thought process currently is there is an annotation that keeps some piece of small amount of data that gives you a hint of the 4 signatures. I actually only care about this one. Then you go validate that one is real. Like it's just a hint, if you will. Like there's no trusted piece of data in it. It says of these 4 manifests that are reference types, one of them says Acme Rockets production, whatever that string says that makes that possible. You guys have to decide what exactly that string is. And that says, okay, this is the one. I'm not going to spend any time on the other 3 because they don't even hint that they're the right ones. They're Dockers, there's Wabbit networks, whatever. This is the Acme Rocket signature. Then you can go fetch that data and do all of the validations you want on it. And if it says it's Acme Rockets production and it turns out in validation it's not, that's good to know, and it fails validation. That's the current thing.
So the proposal is that they'll be named based on the whatever name that we pick for the root key that you trust, and then you download from.
I can put something in there that says like subject, because I was lifting something from an early prototype that Chiwei did, but even that confused Chiwei a little bit. So clearly I didn't get it right. But whatever piece of string data that you can use that says this is the thing that should, identify it enough, that says, hey, I can say I'm Steve Lasker and there's a couple others in the world. I have to then, that narrows it down.
So then what happens if there are 2, if you want to do threshold signings, you want to download 2 different signatures, they're both from the same root but from different intermediaries or whatever. How do you know which ones to find, and how do you know what
exactly, Marina, exactly, to try to lead on to the point. So let's say you wanted to do this. Let's say we all agreed, okay, you know what, let's just stick the 2 cert chains somewhere, right? Or we could staple them all together, right, in one file. Why not? And let the client to figure out which one is which. Great. So now we stick it in the unsigned header of the envelope, correct? So let's say there's 2 signatures.
Are you correlate? Sorry, Krishna, just so I may follow your conversation. Are you saying the piece of data I was talking about is in the unsigned envelope?
Yeah, it has to be, right? Otherwise, or part of a signed payload.
Well, hold on. Just because this is important to tease out these pieces, at least with the thinking. And this is why. Let me back up a second. If you remember early on, we talked about we have subject matter experts. We have the plumbers, we have the HVAC people, everybody knows their area, and we're trying to correlate the expertise of each to figure out how do we assemble this thing. So
sure. Yeah.
This is why I'm not trying to be a security crypto expert. That's what you guys are here. From the registry side, all I'm saying is there is this manifest thing that has this concept of annotations, and it can return information. It's actually not, at least my current thinking, and so I'm trying to figure out how do we tease these apart so we achieve all goals. It doesn't have the envelope. The envelope, the way I'm not hearing you guys describe it, there's an envelope, there's a signature, there's, what was the third thing you guys were talking about? The graph. There's a graph there.
Certificate chain.
That's a certificate chain. Sorry. So all of that certificate chain and all of that content is contained in what we're calling the signature. Whether it's one or multiple blobs or one blob with multiple files, that will be contained in that chunk that we would put in. When I request the registry to give me the related things, remember, because when it asks for related things, it's going to get the SBOMs, the scan results, anything that somebody wants to relate to an artifact. One of those things would be signatures. The question is, of all the signatures, how do I get the ones that I care about? Because there'll be multiples. And to your point, not just that there are multiples that are associated, I don't care about one. What I hear you two talking about is there's actually 2 or 3 that I care about out of the 10. I'll increase it to 10. That's totally fine. The idea is it's not an envelope, what I'm suggesting. There's just an annotation that keeps some kind of hint string that helps the client know of the 10 signatures, these are the 3 that I care about. And then you go and I'm completely leaving it open here. Give yourself 256 characters, maybe 512. I don't remember if annotations has a limit, but just think short, unverifiable strings that give you a hint. And then you go and get the signatures, which has the envelope, the chain, the content, everything you're thinking about.
Okay, great. Thanks. That's very helpful. Now, is anyone signing these annotations? And the question is who?
Well, that's what's interesting. The signature manifest actually is not signed because you're always signing the thing that's there already. So
Yeah.
You can kind of think of the manifest as being untrusted. That's why I was calling it a hint.
Got it.
Just says, this is the thing that you care about. And then the content that comes back of that signature has all the information that you would verify to say the content is true. Just like I'm saying, like you look in the old days of white pages and in the internet for phone numbers, you can see there's multiple Steve Laskers, but only one of them is me. How you decide to verify it's me or me, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
The point is
I
that's
see.
the thought process.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can try to answer Milin's question. Let's see if I understand both of you correctly. Milin is saying, okay, great. So I'm given 2 signatures, right, on this envelope, on a single DISI envelope, and nobody is telling me where do I find the public keys for the signatures? How do I verify them?
No. Sorry. This is
go
in the
ahead,
context of a single signature. We're
It's
not.
a single signature on each DISI, but you have multiple DISIs that you want to verify.
Oh,
so you want
different
multiple signatures, but from
multiple
different
envelopes.
objects. Yeah.
I see. Okay, great. Okay, but we still have the same problem of where do I find the public keys?
Yes,
Couldn't it
that's
be
kind of-
part
that's
of the
question.
annotation, right? You could. We don't recommend it being unsigned, but it could be part of the annotation. I think Milin's question is why not put it inside the envelope, which I think I disagree with for now.
The certificate chain, I feel like it's actually, it's the chain is signed itself. I feel like the unencrypted isn't my biggest concern for this particular piece because it kind of is, if it's done right, there's each element is signed by the previous one. My bigger concern is just discovery. Is if there are multiple signatures, how do you even know which ones to look at if you don't know which intermediaries you're using, which routes you trust? Like, because if they're multiple from a different route, multiple from a different intermediary, but
Marina,
down the tree,
I totally agree.
how do you know what signatures to find? Unless that chain information is stored in a separate place, you could look at first to know what you should then look at.
I totally agree. But I think Milin's question is specifically, can we change DISI? So for TSA, it makes sense to update DISI. DISI is supposed to be dead simple, right? So there's a reason there's basically only 3 fields in there. Payload type, signatures. That's it, right? So we decided to add an extension for TSA because it makes sense. You need a signature on top of the signature, right? The TSA signature on top of the developer signatures, let's say. Great, okay. Now, should we update DISI to add an extension to add a third chain in there? This is where I think we're losing the dead simple part of the envelope, trying to cover all use cases. That doesn't necessarily make sense with DISI. So I think it should be an extension to DISI, but not DISI. Does this make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly the question that I'm asking, and why DISI cannot support it. I guess I think there's a debate to be had in terms of if DISI is going to support X509 based signatures. Should it have a top level envelope field for the certificate chain? And just to answer Marina's question on the validation and the discovery, I think that is a separate aspect. Even if we store these as separate blobs or single envelope, that part is orthogonal to the storage and being able to store this in a single blob or separate blobs. The discovery problem still exists either way you do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. It's a separate problem, but I think it's super related because I think if you start with a trusted key and you want to use that to find a signature that you trust, whether that's a root key, intermediary, as you were saying, or whatever kind of key you trust, I think that being the ability to go from there to the key you trust and then to the signature you trust or to the envelope you trust, I think that can be part of the same solution as where to store this chain. Because otherwise, you're basically storing the chain in multiple places, which seems a little,
I think
wasteful.
that part I think your concern makes sense, but because a signature, even if we separate out the signature envelope and the certificate chain into separate blobs, they're going to be associated with the same signature manifest. So when we talk about multiple signature in my mind is represented by multiple signature manifest. Those are the top level objects. And under it is that signature's corresponding envelope and certificate chain. So either ways, you are going to have to deal with multiple signature manifests when you deal with multiple signatures. So the only additional overhead, if we do it as separate blobs versus single envelope blob containing everything, is you'll end up downloading the signature part in addition to the certificate chain in the chain validation phase of the overall verification.
Yeah, and I think that builds in the discovery. Sorry, Brandon's had his hand up for a minute. I don't want to.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing the concern about doing a separate download. You're gonna, when you pull down this entire signature manifest, you'll just pull down the whole collection of everything. It's like you don't pull down a Docker image and just pull down the first layer, and then you run it and you say, oh, now I need the second layer. No, you just pull the whole image when you do the pull. And so whether or not it's separate blobs, I don't see the issue with that. And so I think going back to Steve's earlier point, we got a lot of different people with different subject matter experts. We've got people that know DISI and they're looking for how they can shoehorn this into DISI. But we've got a lot of people that know registries here too that can say, hey, there's already a solution that we've got on this side.
I think the input I'm giving is from the signing provider side, because for example, AWS will implement a signer service for this, or Azure will implement a signing service for this. Notary V2 will may have a PKCS11 provider that interacts with your YubiKey or some other. You can extend this. Each of these, it'll make it complicated for these signing service providers, either remote service or local components, to assemble these pieces of information. It just makes it multiple. You'll interact with that component multiple times, and also makes it difficult to keep a track of the correspondence. I think there's details missing from how a signature is generated, and also details missing from how verification occurs that influences some of the signature format. I think we have a sense of how that works, but unless we maybe have a separate document detailing that out, we can't see all the tie-ins.
Yeah, I'd be strongly in favor of having some of this stuff drawn out in graph of some kind of saying, okay, this is where we need multiple objects and putting it in there. Because some of this, when you get down to looking at it from the registry side, it's just going to look like multiple files in the same directory. And so the question that we're asking here is, does DISI need to be extended so that everything is in the same file, or do we just want two files in the same directory? And then once you make that decision, we can map that into registries very easily.
I mean, or it's just we're putting another envelope around the DISI envelope.
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
which is trivially kind of mergeable in principle, but it's a question of what's simpler.
It would also give us a chance to flush out. I mean, a lot of these things seem like good ideas at first until we go implement them, and then we find edge cases. So I think if we can just, yes, we should draw it out, and then we should try to implement it, because at some point we're going to figure out this makes perfect sense, and let's merge. And Justin's suggestion, merge two envelopes, because this makes perfect sense. It's silly, it's two. Or it turns out what we need doesn't make sense, and we can do something else, do it a different way. I think we're getting pretty close.
I think Trishang's suggestion of extension to Dizzy specific for this container signing application probably at least makes sense to me. That can be a initial direction, and if after we go down this path, it makes sense to larger community, Dizzy could extend to adopt it as a top level header if there is pushback on adopting it now. And that's again, we are just want to point out that we are not saying Dizzy is the format that we are gonna use. I don't think there's full consensus on that. We are trying to see if Dizzy can satisfy the set of requirements that we are laying out. I think JWT is still the other option that can be looked at. If we that is still an open option. This is just answering questions in terms of can Dizzy be used for the signature format, and these are the gaps that we saw, and we're trying to highlight and answer that.
Yeah, so maybe the next thing we should do is try a prototype with it and see, and play with these things. Play with where you put the signature, the certificate chain, and this discovery question, and see if there's like a thing that could work, and then discuss if that thing is something that we want, something like that. Because I think some of these questions I think would just kind of be resolved once you start doing that, and others might get worse. So. Yeah.
We have been talking about getting, like, we have the first two prototypes that have really fleshed out a bunch of these things. And we always said that these were revocation scenarios. It was just how do we start to figure out the signature flows? How do we figure out how do we get these things in the registry? And we have a ton of great data that came out of it that gave us the new refers API that, so let's do some more modeling, right? Like, let's do more prototypes to see how this works. And that we are ready to start defining, I think, the next prototype, and I'm air quoting because we also got really good feedback that says having these off in the prototype branches are confusing because we don't really know what's current. So the next iterations would go into main, and when we're ready, we'll cut a release out of main, and that'll be it. So we'll invert the model, is basically saying. I've been trying to hold main to be what we're actually going to ship final, as opposed to and work in branches, and we're going to invert that and say, no, main is going to have our current iterations, and we'll cut releases as most projects do. So,
right, but so what exactly is being released there? I still feel like I'm confused about that, because we have like some prototypes, but now we're changing the envelope, we're changing all these pieces of the prototypes. I worry about, I don't know, I still have this concern, which I'm definitely.
No, that's fair. I'm trying to, I'm trying to do the release with air quotes here where there is video, right? So it's like we've released prototype, was it 1 and 2 or 2 and 3? I've actually lost track now because I saw prototype 3. Brandon, was that 1 and 2? Is that what you said? Okay, I saw prototype 3 and I was confused about that. So we've released prototypes 1 and 2. Released means people can compile it, use it with a local copy of distribution. That's what release means. If somebody wants to go build something on that, that's their choice, but it's going to change. Prototype 3, which I'm not going to call it prototype 3 anymore. The next thing that we'll work on, instead of it being in a branch, it'll just be in main. And we won't declare, we'll declare what kind of release it is. And we've said there is no stability between releases because we're not at a point where we're comfortable yet. We will get to a point where we're comfortable enough that we'll make a release that we will use, for the first round of customer scenarios, and subsequent releases will have to deal with the fact that that content is out there. So we will have to make a decision at some point. Here's envelopes, payloads, whatever it is that you guys say that it's going to be stuffed in this content that we will use, and then we'll move on from there. And the next release we'll have to deal with. We now have billions of content that had this content in it that we need to account for. Does that help?
Yes, maybe as long as we make it clear it's like a 0 point something release instead of a 1 point something, just to make it clear that we can still change whenever we want.
Oh yeah,
But, keeping in mind that people are using it. I think that part I could understand.
Yeah, I think that, I think we have to be pretty, we we need to be very clear to people that they, when they shouldn't use it and what the implications of using anything are. Like it's not, whether it's not being vetted or it's not compatible with things that may come in the future or whatever. But so I don't think anyone's going to be using anything now, and we're definitely not putting any guarantees on anything at the moment. This is just, we just want to be shipping prototypes because they have much better discussion tools than diagrams.
And maybe something we can do is look through the requirements and see whatever we release, what it does and doesn't do, and just kind of maybe make that part of the release. Like this is our to-do list basically of goals for the project, and this is what we've done so far, just to make it clear like which properties you are
check boxes
at any given time. Yeah, just because I think that just make it super clear to people who don't show up to these meetings every week what they are and aren't getting from each.
That's fair. I've been looking for some help, and we actually do have some help from some doc writers. They're going to start helping assemble this in a better fluid content, because that has been good feedback. And I'm looking, we have some official people that are going to help us with it. If there's unofficial people, whatever that means, like Brendan's actually put together some really great stuff. I think it was mostly around the compose that kind of assembled this together. Like we definitely want to make all of this easier to consume, and having that checklist. Well, it's not just the checklist of goals. So yes, we want a checklist of goals that we've outlined from the beginning, and here's where we are. And this release, again, air quoting release, it'll say whatever it is, that because people clear expectations of this is a learning exercise until we get to whatever that point is. And here's the check boxes. And if you look at prototypes 1 and 2, they were very explicit. For instance, it is not covering revocation. We don't have revocation figured out yet. We are working on revocation. So I think we have been being pretty explicit about that. You could always be better.
Well, I think this revocation, there's discovery there. I mean, like, I'm not saying that this is like, this is just where we are. We haven't solved revocation, discovery, timeliness, a lot of these questions. And I think there are hard questions that we have to talk about. But I just want to make it very clear that what we're releasing is not a final solution that covers even the security properties of V1, because it's not quite there yet, which is, it's just where it is. But I don't want, I know there's a lot of confusion about, what the project is, because it shares the name with this other thing, which is different. So just,
Cool.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt. We have 15 minutes left and a few agenda items to cover.
But do we, just before we move into the next, are we comfortable with where we're at with Dizzy at this point to make next step progress?
I think we, at least, I think we are, what I'm seeing is not everybody is fully convinced that it needs to be in a single blob. I would still like to continue and answer questions. I'm still trying to convince people that it's going to be beneficial if it is in a single blob. Whether Dizzy supports it or not, as an officially or as an extension, or if we do this in JWS, in all of these cases, like for example, if you do it in JWS, it has a XYZ top level attribute for the certificate chain. So it's already supported there. I think that needs to be resolved. The other topics.
Can we mock up?
Yeah.
Sorry, because I hear you trying to move on, but I just want to make sure we nail this one, because I would like to get some prototypes incubated on the next round, whether it's a JWS and Dizzy, and I don't know, but can we start creating, whether it's hack docs or like we can use the discussions in GitHub, because the hack docs are getting a bit confusing on where they all are. So if we can start maybe a discussion, if that's okay, if people don't like that, like I'm fine either way. Like maybe what we do is we create an issue that links to the hack doc. That seems to help, at least knowing where to find it. And then let's outline let's make some payloads of what this thing would look like. Does that make sense? Like this payload would wind up in this file. This blob has this file or this file and this other file.
I actually go a step further and propose that we iterate on the prototype and see what happens when we try and write this thing in code. Because I think that's where a lot of these concerns come up, is about how these processes work when put together.
That sounds great. I think it's yes, we should turn into code, but what are we putting in the code? I think I'm still, at least for me, I'm still hearing what does the actual payload of this thing look like? So we
So-
can identify what the payloads are,
I
then we
think-
can paste them into the.
I think that's relatively clear, but it's probably worth writing it down. But I think we know what needs to go in. I think, but yeah, let's write it down and implement it and check.
I think there are a few pieces. One is in the signature format doc, we can start fleshing out what a payload looks like, give examples of that, debate on that. There's the other piece, which is how payload, TSA signature, cert, chain, etc. relate to the signature manifest. How do multiple signatures look like? I think some examples or illustrations around that will help. Regarding prototyping itself, I think we are at a point where we can start prototyping with JWS, but not with Dizzy. We'll need at least the TSA support in Dizzy to be able to start prototyping with Dizzy or official Dizzy, or we can fork it, add extensions for now, do prototyping, and not wait for Dizzy to implement the times TSA yet. Certificate chain is still an open discussion.
Yeah, I think
Marina,
as a separate thing.
Could this team validate some of the TSA stuff that you guys are thinking about? Like, what if we, I want to be careful of the word fork. Fork's always a loaded word. Could we take what you have, somehow graph on some other properties that represent TSA in a way that you're thinking you want to do anyway, and we build it into our next experiment?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as you know, an individual, I don't want to speak for the project. I think that would be great, and I think that one of the pieces that piece is missing before it can be merged into DISI is in fact a prototype of proving that this is actually a thing that is feasible and there's a way to do it, and picking a format and those kinds of things. None of which is unsolvable; it just needs to be done, and I think we could definitely do that. So yeah, so if we were to quote unquote fork it, we could then maybe even merge that back in once those changes are made.
I think my preference would be we start prototyping with JWS, have something shown there, and we can do the same exercise with Dizzy. Till that point, we can continue the conversations in Dizzy repository around the support for these. I don't think we have the bandwidth to do two parallel prototypes.
The current prototype uses JWT, right? So I feel like that was my proposal for using the other one, just to compare it with that. But
the current one uses JWT, but we want to use JWS because JWT, as far as I can remember, doesn't support unauthenticated attributes like TSA signature along with it. And I think the prototype needs to demonstrate a signature with a TSA and a certificate chain to be complete. Does that sound good? We can start with that.
Basically, I think just getting this in code, I think will just help all of us. So whatever we get in there. Yeah.
And there were a few other topics. I'm gonna spend some time on that. One was indicating signature algorithm and parameters. This was one of the from last week's notes. Are there objections around if that is indicated as a signed attribute in the payload?
I think we can try it again. I think that's one of my goals, at least with this prototyping thing, would be that we could try it and then see if, for example, the discovery or something else comes up with a more obvious solution. And if it doesn't, then yeah.
Sure. The only thing I wanted to point out there is like one of the solutions mentioned in related discussions is that the signature algorithm can be specified by wherever is the key specification in the corresponding trust configuration, etc. But that's not always possible because a consumer may not have the leaf key information related to the leaf key. In many cases, you anchor to either a root or intermediate in the chain, and you want to accept all signatures under that intermediate. So you're not really holding metadata associated with a large set of keys under an intermediate. So it needs to be indicated somewhere in the signature. I think signed attribute is the most that can be done. The other thing that can be done is in the implementation. I think we have been talking about algorithm none in JWT and replacing symmetric with asymmetric, the RSA versus HMAC, those kind of problems. I think an application specific mapping there on this is the signature format as a signed attribute, and the corresponding mapping in the application which says exactly fully qualified encryption algorithm plus hash. If that mapping is present, I think that protects against those kind of issues, and it scopes it down to exactly what is being supported.
Yeah, I agree. I think in general, having the algorithm be tied to the key more so than to the signature kind of makes that a lot more clear. I think that's I think what you're saying as well. Yeah, I think that's really important.
I thought that explanation of that and I think it was in the DISI talks was very clear about that it needs to be tied to the key because it can't be elsewhere. And I think that I mean, when you have a key, you hopefully know what it is. So I think in general, it shouldn't be an issue that way around. And if you have a cert chain and a key, hopefully the cert chain is telling you what kind of key it is all the way down.
I think in some of the GitHub conversations, it was highlighted that not all algorithms indicate the specific hashing algorithm. I think ECC was given as an example. Again, there are gaps there. I think when we get into the details of what algorithms we support and how it is indicated, there may be a matrix there around these are the conditions in which you use the mapping if it is not indicated by the key itself in the searching. Okay, I think that sounds good. The next one was custom attributes, was discussed in the last meeting. I think there were questions around whether there are any AWS specific ones. So basically, we want the core capability is we want customers to be able to specify any key value pairs as signed attributes, and for them to use that either as information or do additional validation on top of standard validation supported by Notary V2. So they may do a signature validation. Signature validation says signature is good. These are the attributes that were signed, and they can use that metadata and do OPA or gatekeeper or any kind of policy that they want to do additionally on it. That is the core capability. And as long as the signature supports that, I think we are in agreement around these custom attributes should be stored in the payload. I think we are good there.
So this was the conversation. They can't be annotations on the manifest because, to Trishang's point earlier, the manifest itself, the signature manifest is not signed. Anything in that manifest is hint data.
Yep.
And to the content, which is signing the subject manifest, the way that's currently designed. So you want to be able to have some additional annotations, some additional data elements that actually are signed. So that's why you're trying to bring them into the signature.
I mean, do we just want to specify that we always sign an OCI descriptor? And because that has annotations and it has the content hash in it, and that's...
We are, but the OCI descriptor you're signing is the container image, which he's trying to add annotations to after the fact, if I understand it right.
The artifact spec has descriptors that point to your blobs, and it has the descriptors that points to your image. So there is going to be a descriptor pointing to the blob.
But the descriptor that's pointing to the blob is not what's signed. You're signing, if I use the netmonitor image example, you're signing the content of the netmonitor image. So if he put the annotations on the netmonitor image, then yes, the signature would sign that data. But if you're adding annotations to the net monitor image on Tuesday. You build it on Monday and Tuesday. I'm using drastic time frames to make it simple. You could call it 1 hour later. On Monday, you push the content. On Tuesday, it's really slow, very efficient signing service, pushes the signatures with new annotations. Those new annotations have to be somewhere that are actually signed. Now, just as an interesting idea, just the references, the reason that the blobs are 0 or more, I could push annotations, just annotations as a reference type to the registry, and then I could sign that annotation content. But that's a little bit of a mind blow.
I think, sorry to short circuit. I think we can hash it out when we define the payload. I think both options are valid the way I see it. I think we can debate it out there. As long as it's somewhere inside of the payload, I think we should be good.
You're saying that Dizzy does support the additional payload content?
Well, the payload, you can sign whatever payload you want, but
No, I think he's saying, can the signature itself, is it the signature or envelope have additional?
The payload itself, not at, this is not at the envelope, this is at the payload level.
Yeah, because it has to be signed. So the question is what payload you actually sign. So is the payload, that's why having the payload as a descriptor which effectively implicitly which is a reference to the content, potentially makes sense, because it gives us a place to put arbitrary annotations. It doesn't have to be the same descriptor as you use necessarily in other places to refer to that content, but it means you've signed the hash, you've signed the length, and you've signed some additional annotations, and you then have something that's a trusted reference to the content in the registry.
Can we mock up some examples? Because I'm a little confused. And so, but we're at 1 minute. We said we want to move this time. We want to respect people's schedules. So first of all, thank you for Maureen and Trish for your contributions. I thought this was really constructive today. This is the conversations we've been trying to have for a long time now. So I really appreciate your input here.
Thank you.
We'll continue. The weekly calls are just our conversations. There's a lot of stuff happened last night. We've got the links to that. We'll continue the conversations with. Can we get some hack docs that a discussion point to or something? We can talk on the Notary channel after this, but let's mock up some of these files, because Justin's idea, at least for me, I need to see it to see where the signing, and I thought that what the properties could be in the envelope. So if we can start writing those files down, then we can start writing code around creating those files, and we can start doing the next, I don't know if we'll call it prototypes. Let's call it, everybody's got their HIPs and things and PPs or whatever. Let's figure out whatever the right acronym is for what we want to release. And we'll discuss it on the Notary Slack channel. And I appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Good week.
And I'll get this video posted today, I promise. See you later.